Welcome to this explainer on the neurobiology of lasting motivation and habit systems. Let's just dive straight in by looking at a universal phenomenon that we literally see every single year. January 1st rolls around, right? The gyms are absolutely packed, fresh new journals are cracked open, and everyone's motivation is just off the charts. We all start out incredibly strong. But then, almost like clockwork, mid-January hits. The gyms are completely empty again. That beautiful new journal is sitting untouched on your nightstand, basically acting as an overpriced coaster, and those books you swore you'd read are still just staring at you from the shelf. So I've got to ask you directly, why does your motivation crash? Why does that burning, totally unstoppable drive you felt on day one completely collapse after just 2 weeks? When it happens, it feels terrible, doesn't it? You probably blame yourself. You think you're just kind of lazy, or you don't have enough willpower, or maybe you just didn't want the goal badly enough in the first place. Well, diving into the research on this completely relieves us of all that guilt. The data shows it is not willpower at all. It's neurobiology. Your failure to stick to that new habit isn't a personal moral failing, and it has absolutely nothing to do with being weak-willed. It's just simple, predictable brain chemistry. Understanding this separation is quite literally the difference between people who successfully build lasting habits and people who just quit forever. To really grasp why this happens, we need to anchor our discussion on one specific number: 14. Day 14 is the inevitable mark where habituation kicks in, and that intense motivation completely vanishes. But to understand why the 14-day mark is so uniquely deadly to our goals, we really have to look closely at the underlying neuroscience happening inside your head. It all comes down to dopamine, but we need to radically redefine what dopamine actually is. Most people mistakenly think it's the reward chemical, that you get a hit of it after you do something good. But actually, dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It's what makes you want something. It's why tracking a package online, honestly, often feels way more exciting than actually opening the box. That intense anticipation is a massive dopamine flood in your brain, making you feel momentarily unstoppable. You don't need willpower on day one because you're physically and chemically energized by this spike. Just think about the biological inevitability of how our brains normalize. Day one, you've got peak dopamine. The novelty of the new habit is super high. But your brain simply cannot run on these massive dopamine spikes forever. It would be totally unsustainable and, frankly, incredibly unhealthy. So the brain does exactly what it's designed to do. It adapts. By day 10, the novelty is dropping off significantly. And by day 14, your dopamine has completely returned to baseline. And this brings us to a massive, real game changer of a realization. Your motivation never actually left. The dopamine did. Most people interpret this perfectly natural return to a neurochemical baseline as losing interest or losing the drive. And man, that interpretation is a dangerous trap. When the dopamine drops, people assume they're doing something wrong or the habit just isn't for them anymore, so they throw in the towel. But returning to baseline is just your brain doing its normal job. So, the absolutely crucial point here is contrasting how two different types of people handle this exact biological drop-off. Person A relies purely on motivation. They wait for that feeling to strike, they hit the gym super hard for 2 weeks, the dopamine inevitably crashes, and they quit because they claim they lost the drive. Person B, however, relies on systems. They decide, I go to the gym Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m. That's just what I do. There is absolutely zero negotiation with themselves, and they never wait around to feel like it. This brilliantly illustrates the power of removing emotional negotiation from your daily habits. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't feel like brushing your teeth, you just do it. You aren't standing in your bathroom every single morning having a deep existential negotiation with yourself about whether you have the emotional drive and willpower to pick up a toothbrush. It's a deeply ingrained system. Successful people approach their biggest life goals with that exact same mechanical mindset. High achievers know that the system creates the momentum, not the feeling. They operate their systems fully aware that the dopamine crash is coming. When day 14 hits and they feel absolutely nothing, they don't panic. They don't sit around waiting for the feeling to magically return, because they know waiting is exactly what causes failure. The system just carries them straight through that baseline dip. But to get the full picture here, we also need to pivot for a second and address a massive modern obstacle. Why does normal stuff feel so incredibly boring to us now? Why does sitting down to read a physical book, or having a slow-paced conversation, or doing deep, meaningful work feel almost impossible for some of us, compared to endlessly scrolling through 15-second videos? The issue is that many of us aren't just dealing with a normal dopamine baseline, we are dealing with an artificially elevated one. This happens because everyday dopamine leaks build a massive tolerance in your brain. It literally forces you to need stronger and stronger stimuli just to feel anything at all. Think about it. Social media, endless streaming, gaming, porn, sugar, constant phone stimulation. We are bombarding our receptors all day long. The exact same stimulus that felt amazing a month ago now just feels kind of meh. You're stuck on a treadmill, and normal, healthy habits simply cannot compete with that massive, instantaneous neurochemical rush. So how do we fix this? The source material points to a radical approach to deliberately deprive your brain and lower that baseline. This brings us to the 30-day dopamine reset protocol. If you want your goals to feel naturally engaging again, you have to cut out the artificial leaks. For 30 days, you remove the constant high dopamine hits so your brain's overloaded reward system can actually recalibrate and heal. Now, fair warning here, days 1 through 7 are going to be genuine hell. You will face intense boredom, anxiety, and irritability because your brain is literally screaming for its usual cheap dopamine hits. But if you can outlast that initial withdrawal, days 8 through 29 are all about rebalancing. By day 30 and beyond, your baseline is fully restored. Normal activities like reading, engaging conversations, and actual focused work will begin to feel deeply rewarding once again. The ultimate goal of learning all this is to figure out how to work with your brain, not against it. We've talked a lot about the underlying neuroscience so far, but now let's transition into the practical application. How do we take all this science and build an unshakable framework for your actual daily life? Here is a highly actionable 4-step framework you can implement literally today. Step 1, expect the crash. Don't fight it. Just know that around day 10 to 14, the dopamine is going to leave. Step 2, build your systems early. Create your rigid routines while you still have that initial wave of motivation. Step 3 is absolutely vital. Default low. If you completely lose motivation, what is the bare minimum you can do? Don't want to do a full workout? Just go to the gym and do 5 minutes. Don't want to write a chapter? Write one single paragraph. Consistency matters far more than intensity. And step 4, identify your dopamine leaks. Be fiercely honest about where you're getting unnecessary hits that are killing your drive for the important stuff. So to wrap up, motivation isn't a character trait. It's a temporary neurochemical state. Understanding that and building systems that don't depend on it is exactly what separates people who change and people who don't. It's time to stop judging yourself for a biological process and completely rethink how you approach your long-term goals. And the good news? Once you've built the system and it's running on its own, motivation will come back, but you won't need it anymore. That's the sweet spot. Breaking this down has definitely made me rethink how I approach my goals now. That was valuable, and I think a lot of people needed to hear this today. So I'll leave you with this final provocative question. If your motivation completely disappeared tomorrow morning, what non-negotiable system do you